Thanks, Chris. You can see what it says up there, but I also want to say a couple of things before we start about what mathematics by inquiry is not. It is not an excuse to let kids loose on doing whatever they feel like doing in mathematics and calling it inquiry. It is also not a comprehensive program that's aimed to cover the whole... Whoops, I've just turned that off. How did I do that? Sorry, Chris. The middle one. It is also not intended to be a comprehensive program that covers the whole school curriculum or a textbook or anything like that. It's meant to be sort of what it says there. And I just want to reflect on that wonderful presentation that we just had from Peter, because I think that was actually a brilliant example. And some of the things that came through in that were Peter continually saying, what if this and what if that and how do we, and so on. That's part of it. Another part of it for me was that Peter couldn't do any of those things without actually having a decent bank of mathematics skills to start with. So we're certainly not ignoring skills just in favour of playing with some ideas. And the other thing about that was that it was extremely structured and directed, and the teacher was very much, in this case Peter, was very much in control of what happened. And those are all things that I think we want to value. So let me tell you a little bit more about the project. The middle one? Which one? Not that one? That one. I think we've gone too far. Sorry. Here we go. So it's a $6.4 million project, which started on the 1st of November 2015. So I've been in the job back in Canberra, which is lovely for all those people who I met before in Canberra. Since the 1st of November 2015, finishes on the 30th of June 2018, and we're running it out of the Australian Academy of Science in collaboration with the Australian Association of Mathematics Teachers. So the materials development side of things, and I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute, is happening here at the Academy, and we've just employed a team of 3 writers. They've been working with me for 2 weeks. That's also supported by some people whose names will be very familiar to many of you, Kay Stacey and Peter Sullivan. And if you were to name 2 people who had the greatest profile in mathematics education in Australia, you would be hard-pressed to find anyone else other than Peter and Kay. And the Australian Association of Mathematics Teachers is responsible for the dissemination, the engagement of schools, the trialling processes, and they have a national manager of engagement, and many of you may know Matt Scoss, so he's been employed full-time by AAMT to take that particular role. So this is what we have promised to deliver to the Commonwealth. The first thing, and I'll show you our very early draft, and this is a week's worth of writing by the writers in a minute. What we've called for a protocol, because we couldn't find a better word for it. We didn't want to use the word framework. We didn't quite know what to call it. But it provides a vision and a rationale for teaching mathematics by inquiry. What that's intended to do is, first of all, to guide the development of all of the resources that we're producing. But it's also meant to be something that empowers teachers to think about what do they really value, what's their vision of mathematics, do we agree with this, and if we do, how does it impact on what we do in the classroom? So it's meant to be, I guess, a framework for teachers as well as for the people developing the project. We're developing exemplary mathematics by inquiry experiences at every level from foundation to year 10. The first of those will be for years 5, 6, 7 and 8 in October this year, and the rest will gradually be rolled out until June 2018. What they will be is a series of lessons, for want of a better word, but a lesson may not be one particular period, but it will be a learning experience. We're not quite sure yet whether that learning experience will span 2 or 3 kind of lessons, or 1, or a whole lot, whether they'll all be focused on the same thing at each year level. That's still all a little bit up for grabs. But one of the things that we are certain is that wherever possible, And this comes back to the question about getting through the Australian curriculum. Wherever possible, we're going to try to take content descriptors from the Australian curriculum that naturally fit together and meld them together so that students see the coherence of mathematics rather than a sequence of isolated little bits. Judy mentioned about the difficulty of designing STEM experiences. I'd actually go further than that and say that it's extraordinarily difficult to design really good learning experiences just within mathematics. It's actually not a simple task at all to design something that is going to meet the conditions that we've talked about as the protocol, which you'll see in a minute. We're also developing special topics. Again, for want of a better word, that's what we call them, but each of those is a substantial teaching resource addressing identified needs or exploring new boundaries. We're really excited about this. This was something that we fought very hard with the Commonwealth to keep because, of course, they wanted to cut the budget. We said, no, we really want those because what they're intended to be is an opportunity to do something that's new and different and pushes boundaries. They might be something about how to integrate STEM learning in mathematics. They might be how to introduce coding using Scratch and how to teach a whole lot of the maths curriculum using that. They might be pushing boundaries of new technologies. We don't know what they are, but there'll be something that's substantial rather than an exemplary lesson. Backing all that up, there are professional resources, so each will highlight an aspect of mathematics by inquiry. There'll be professional learning resources for teachers that we hope will be accredited through TQI and all of that, but they're things that teachers can engage with in schools using video snippets or whatever else there might be, all of which will be disseminated via Scootle through Education Services Australia, but also through the Australian Association of Mathematics Teachers Dimensions portal. And as part of that, 240 champion teachers will be recruited and trained from across Australia. So here is the first way in which you can get involved. You may want to think about becoming a champion teacher for mathematics by inquiry. Just before we do that, the second dot point I mentioned about the exemplary learning experiences. Part of our challenge as a team is to design those materials in conjunction with teachers. So we're using, I guess, an engineering design process, if you like, where we are developing and trialling at the same time. The first round of trialling is very intensive with the writers going to schools and seeing what happens and trying things out along with the teachers. We won't have ready-made things, we'll have ideas that we want people to test out. Once we've done that, we'll have something that's reasonably developed, and there'll be a second round of trialling, which will again be intensive, but it will be something that's slightly more developed that teachers can try in a variety of different contexts. All that's got to be, for years 5, 6, 7 and 8, that will be done by October. After that, they'll go out for a third round of trialling, which will be to anybody who wants to use it anywhere at all. So the other way you can get involved in the project is be part of that first round of trialling. We're particularly looking for local schools because the writers will be visiting the schools individually and going into the classrooms and working with the teacher. So there's another way of getting involved, and the second round of trialling, of course, is another way of becoming involved. Here's the result of a week's work. This is the start of the Mathematics by Inquiry protocol. So mathematics by inquiry is going to emphasise that mathematics is not purely a body of knowledge to be learnt. Rather, it's the process of exploring patterns and solving problems. And there are 3 dimensions to this. First of all, it's mathematically purposeful, accessible yet engaging, and inquiry-based and adaptive. We trawled around all of the literature we could find on exemplary mathematics teaching, and those 3 bits were, I guess, mostly my synthesis of, if I was going to highlight 3 things that really matter in teaching mathematics, what would they be? And that's what we have come up with. So here's the first one. And I want to highlight that it is the first one and is absolutely at the centre of everything we're talking about, because we've seen lots of stuff, and I'm sure everybody's seen lots of stuff, where the mathematical purpose gets lost. It's exactly what Judy said about some of those STEM experiences. So right at the very centre, mathematics by inquiry is mathematically purposeful. Of course, in the project we're emphasising reasoning and problem solving as two of the fluencies that are in the Australian curriculum that are really important. But equally we want to emphasise, I said reasoning and problem solving, didn't I hope? Equally we want to emphasise fluency and conceptual understanding as being very important. And one of the things that we will be doing that I'm not sure any other resource in Australia has done before is integrating those fluency kinds of activities, resources into the material so that teachers, so that it's not, we'll do a maths by inquiry lesson here and now we'll use the textbook to do the practice. We're actually trying to put it all in together. And the way that you craft fluency activities is actually not a trivial matter. How do you design for student learning? How do you build in the variation? And there's a whole lot of stuff, a whole lot of research around that that we're going to use so that we have very carefully designed exercises in fluency, not just problems to solve. So that's the first dimension and the central one of the protocol, that mathematics by inquiry is mathematically purposeful. The second one is that it's accessible yet challenging. I deliberately wanted to put those together as, if you like, flip sides of a coin, but as two things that are critically important, that we want to challenge all the students, but we equally want to make it accessible to everybody, regardless of where they come from, having a range of entry and exit points. The phrase that's been used around a little bit is low floor, high ceiling. And that's very much how we want these resources to be, so that everybody can gain access. But the very best students can be challenged. And how do we go back? How do we do that? Fortunately, I don't have many slides, so it's easy to go back to where I was. Equally, we want to challenge students to be the best they can be, but equally to challenge their existing conceptions, their conceptions about what mathematics is, their conceptions about themselves as learners of mathematics, and emphasising the action and reflection in the supportive environment. And the third aspect of the protocol is that mathematics by inquiry is inquiry-based and adaptive, engaging students in inquiry-focused learning, emphasising that learning is individual, but it's equally collaborative and it's creative, building in formative assessment and all those sorts of things into the materials. We have a generic email, which is mbi@science.org.au, or you're welcome to contact me. We're in the process of compiling a bit of a database of interested people, so please email me if you are. If you're interested in doing some trialling, if you're interested in being involved in some other way, and for the mathematicians in the audience, if you're interested in looking at any resources that we're developing, we would love you to do that. The more feedback we get, the better. It doesn't exclude statistics, of course, and I had a long discussion with Terry Speed, whom I'm sure some of you will know, about data and meaningful data in schools, so all of that's part of it.
Great. Let's thank Steve. Questions?
Assessment, Steve, will it incorporate attempting to match the task to the achievement standard?
Thanks, Michael. I think I can see an elephant over there somewhere because I think that's one of the elephants in the room in the project, that it actually wasn't part of the brief from the Commonwealth particularly. I think it's one of the things that we really need in developing the classroom resources. Of course, we will have to look at assessment. In developing those special topics, we will certainly have assessment as a major component of that. one of the things that I really hope we can do, and please don't quote me outside this room, this is a private conversation, one of the things I hope we can do is to challenge existing conceptions of what assessment in mathematics ought to be, and challenge the existing emphasis on almost the sole emphasis in some places on standardised testing. We're confident that mathematics by inquiry will not negatively impact on assessment results in NAPLAN, but we're not going to make any claims that we think it will improve them. I'd love to think that it will, but I think what we're really aiming to say is that if you teach mathematics in a way that is, I guess, in line with this, it is not going to negatively impact on what the politicians and others, I guess, value, but it will positively impact in lots of other ways. And I'm hoping that challenging the current assessment regime is something that might inform some subsequent work, but it may not be a big part of this project. Peter had a question. Yes.
Thanks. I'm just wondering, are you therefore looking for people to give ideas for these kinds of projects? And that can be done by emailing?
Absolutely, and we've already had discussions with Jeff Prince, who's made a few suggestions about how he'd love to see biological applications introduced much more strongly into secondary mathematics in particular, and others. So absolutely, yes, and we would love to have any thoughts about meaningful and realistic applications of mathematics that will help to inform the project.
One concern, Steve, is that we already have a lot of stuff. So, you know, teachers will often say, I've spent hours on the internet, come up with all these things. There's already a lot of material out there. And some of the material is actually very good. And I actually would go so far as to say it actually fits your requirement. And one example that comes to mind is Boland Mathematics from the UK. So I'm recommending another really fabulous resource to everyone. Boland, B-O-L-A-N-D, maths. There's a whole lot of tasks that have been designed for Year 8 mathematics, and they take typically 2 to 5 lessons to do, and some of them I think are very, very good. So will you actually be also using your, it's not a framework, I can't remember your word now, protocol, to actually evaluate some existing material and recommend them?
Thanks, Judy. Another really good question, and the answer is absolutely yes. Two of the people who are strongly involved in the project, one is Charles Lovett, who many of you will know, who developed, well, with a whole lot of other people, but essentially the Maths 300 resources. And Charles is very keen to have those as part of the project, so there'll be a bit of a rebadging exercise, assuming we can get all the IP stuff sorted out, that integrates those into Maths by Inquiry. But the other person with whom I spent 2 days a couple of months ago at the University of Nottingham is Malcolm Swan, who did the Boland Maths project, and the University of Nottingham are partners in our project in a different sort of a way, so they'll be subcontracting bits of it. So they're wonderful resources in Boland Maths and the terrific maths assessment resource website that they've got in conjunction with University of Michigan Common Core State Standards in the US. We're hoping to take all of that and build it into mathematics by inquiry, but rebadge it as something that is distinctively Australian where we need to, and particularly meets the protocol that we're describing.
Okay, very last question. I'm just conscious of time. Yep, that's okay.
Very quickly, is there a cost to 2 schools?
Very quickly, no.
Fantastic, thank you. And please join me in thanking Steve for a fantastic talk.